Beyond her work in governmental affairs, Dr. Baker has deep roots in agriculture. She has provided leadership within the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture as a teacher at the secondary school at university levels and was the first female president of the National Association of Agricultural Educators. She has served on the faculty at Penn State and is adjunct faculty member here at North Carolina State. She lives on a working family farm. The director of our agricultural leadership program here at NC State saw her speak at a conference in Pennsylvania and knew that we needed to hear her message today. You'll notice that she has a strong passion and strategy for delivering the message of agriculture to elected officials. Please all join me in welcoming MeeCee Baker.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is certainly an honor and privilege to be here today, and I couldn't be more happy to be among the esteemed guests. It's very humbling. When I first walked in this morning, I saw one of my longtime friends, Marshall Stewart, and I haven't seen Marshall for quite some time. And Marshall was there when I was elected the first female president of the Ag Teachers Association. And certainly we never thought that would happen. But I thought, well, gee, the next time a girl wants to run, and this has been about 20 years ago, we will have been through that process. So, Marshall, it's always great to see you. My husband, Jim, was kind enough to drive me down here, and when we drove through the lovely state of North Carolina, it reminded me of my home. And Jim is also kind enough to join me on that family farm that I have lived on all my life. And as I look at the beautiful countryside here, and I think about the Norman Rockwell life that I grew growing up, it makes me think that, boy, we have come a long way. As a child, I had an outhouse, and there may be one or two of you that had the same thing. Our home now has 2 flush toilets, and certainly we celebrate those advances in technology. We also had that party line, and we had 2 longs and a short, right, Dr. Collins? 2 longs and a short. And my late sister discovered that if we unscrewed the speaker part, we could listen into the neighbors and they would never hear us. Val Giddings and I have now advanced to a BlackBerry, and I understand there's even a phone more technologically advanced than that. Certainly, we are celebrating that type of technological advances. But sometimes, the advances in agriculture and biotechnology are just grossly misunderstood. And a few years back, when I was going in to my doctors, and ladies, you'll understand it was that time for that annual exam that we don't always look forward to. And as I walked in, I saw my doctor, Dr. Woodward, who likes to brag that he is now on the varsity. He just serves the varsity team. Dr. Barrich, his partner, serves the JVs. Dr. Barrich's mother was in my mother's 2nd grade class. We're all small town. And as we chatted, there was references to not giving my daughter any chicken. At the time, she was about 12. Because we pump chickens full of hormones, and we certainly don't want young girls to enter puberty too early because of overconsumption of poultry products. When I asked where that information might have come from, the answer was medical journals. When I asked politely to see the journals, they were not able to deliver. Now, speaking with them and reminding them that in this country it's not legal to shoot poultry full of hormones, and moreover, those breast tissue that we eat is not mammary tissue, there's a little embarrassing moments, but just goes to prove that no matter what level of education, we are confronting gross misunderstanding of agriculture. From that doctor's office, I went from that annual exam that we don't like to that annual x-ray we don't like. And there I was in that position that I'm always afraid there's going to be some type of fire alarm and I'm going to be stuck. And the x-ray technician said, if you're concerned about breast cancer, and I am, you want to stop eating chicken. And guess why? Because there's so much hormones in chickens today. Again, gently, winning more flies with sugar than vinegar, I explained it's not legal in this country. Where did you get that information? From my professional journals. Can you give it to me? Of course she could not. And sometimes I wonder why we're not just misunderstood, but I think at times in agriculture we're also maligned. And that never was more evident to me than in our annual trip this past summer to the Chautauqua Institution in Chautauqua, New York. And I've been gone to Chautauqua for the last 15 years, and I love it. And if you're not familiar with Chautauqua, it is a beautiful little town on Lake Chautauqua in upstate New York. And it was founded in 1870s by a preacher and a professor with 4 main goals in mind: education, agricultural education, adult education for the masses, culture, spirituality, and recreation. This summer, we went during the Food Policy Week. When I looked on the program, there wasn't one producer, not one farmer. And as I went into the bookstore, I didn't see one book that even remotely was supportive of technology in agriculture today. And when I looked in the newspaper, the articles weren't necessarily supportive either. There was one shining light in that program of many lectures throughout the week, and it was Dr. Gary Moore. Dr. Gary Moore of NC State was giving the Heritage Lecture, and I was so proud. And he very deftly slipped in some information about GMOs. And if you've ever been to one of Dr. Moore's lectures, you know, he has the clicker, he has the whole crowd voting as we go along, and you're watching the tabulations come up. And he held that audience in the palm of his hand. It was the only bright light during that week. One particular show, there was 5,000 people watching slides go. One slide came up that showed farmers in other countries, developing countries. One in particular, it said, these farmers are growing more on an acre of land than, next slide, this farm family from the northern plains that have been there for generations after generations. And there was wild applause. And it wasn't the applause that I would have originally thought. Let's celebrate the American farmer, and let's celebrate the advances in developing countries. And at that time, you know, I really did feel as an American farmer that I had entered the public enemy #1 stage. And for the rest of the week, I found myself in discussions defending not only myself as a farmer, but defending the technology. A few years before that, at that same institution, I was listening to a lecture in the Hall of Philosophy. And as I listened, and I was sort of playing with my daughter as I listened, I heard them talk about corn production. One of the panelists, who was from Canada, said, biotechnology, big ag, and agriculturalists are growing corn today with one sole purpose in mind, and that sole purpose is more starch, and they are causing the obesity epidemic in this country. I had to go ask a question. And I'm usually not the first one in the line, but I snuck over there, raised my hand, and said, gee, I raise corn. My first job was in extension. I'm a high school ag teacher, you know, advisor of the Future Farmers of America. I'm on the faculty of a land-grant institution. And what I understand is that because we're more adept at removing that seed coat, there may be more starch in that seed, but by percentage, but the protein level is the same. We're not raising corn to have more starch to cause the obesity epidemic. And I asked the individual who made that statement if he could back up what he said, and I asked him what his sources were, and his source was King Corn, the documentary. I got a little applause after that one. When I think about why there is such misinformation, and maybe agriculture has become maligned, it's not hard to guess. And my guess is social media. I did bring a little show and tell along, the teacher that I am. And who doesn't want to be fit? I found Fitness Magazine this month, and I opened it up and just found one piece, gave a little validation to something that we all know. And is this: do we need another thing to obsess over? I think not. But if you're worried and you have food fears, probably you get most of your information from social media. I believe that to be true. When I look at social media today, typically we are misunderstood and maligned. However, and it has been talked about in this conference, the one piece of social media, that one YouTube of Jimmy Fallon asking folks if they consume GMOs and having people spit or sputter and absolutely not, and then saying, what are GMOs? And having people spit or sputter and not be able to give the answer, I think has been an absolute game changer. And as I've talked about biotechnology since that time, and I've been able to refer people back to that piece and even have them maybe watch it while we stand there, and then say what you all know, and the cliche that goes around our community, I'm sure you want to know the science and not base your opinion on superstition. The wheels start to turn. That one little clip has made an incredible difference in the day-to-day conversation that we have about biotechnology and agriculture from my standpoint, and I am that L word, I'm a lobbyist, but more importantly, I'm a teacher. And day in and day out, I'm never going to leave my teaching roots. The second piece of media that made me stand proud, 2 Super Bowls ago in 2013. I'm sure you'll remember that commercial for Dodge Ram trucks. And Paul Harvey, who had passed away 4 years before, so eloquently told us we needed someone to get up before dawn, milk the cows, work all day, milk the cows again, so God made a farmer. It was a long commercial, and one, as Marshall and I talked this morning, came from an original speech to the Future Farmers of America in 1978, and Marshall was there in Kansas City, Missouri, and heard that original address. It sent chills up my spine, and still does. I teared up, I looked at my daughter, I thought of my parents, I thought of my grandparents and my great-grandparents, and the history of farmers that have been passed down through my family. That commercial and that week was just incredible as more and more people got on the website to watch the commercial to raise money for the FFA. Those 2 pieces, that social media, Jimmy Fallon, and the media, the commercial, and go back and watch it if you haven't done that lately, makes you think just a little bit differently. So with all of that misinformation, I think it's time that we come back to the old farm pond and we start tossing a few pebbles that causes that ripple effect that might just create a wave to change a conversation. And how are we going to do that? Well, I'm a teacher, so I have a couple homework assignments. Number 1, I want you to advocate for agriculture every single day. Advocate for biotechnology every single day. And I want you to do it using this technique. If you have young children, like Libby, she learned to read using SQR3. You scan the article, then you ask yourself some questions, read, recite, review. Now, we're going to do the same thing. Whenever you're scanning your iPhone, BlackBerry, Val, I'm not sure, for information every morning, or you're scanning the radio on the way to work, or you're scanning the newspaper, or you're scanning the TV, or you're scanning a conversation, and you hear something that doesn't quite register, I want you to pause, question it, research the answer, and then respond either writing or rhetoric. So SQR3. When you're scanning, stop. Question those things that sound off. Do your research because we want to be based in science, not superstition, and then respond every single time. That's your assignment every single day. Now, I've had a few of those moments the last week. The first, I was in the Capitol cafeteria, in those gilded hallways. The Capitol in Pennsylvania is just absolutely beautiful. And the cafeteria there isn't much different than the cafeteria that I ate with in school. The same kids sit at the same tables every day. So the kids that sit at my table are another lobbying firm about the size of mine, a few staffers. And one of the lobbyists said to me, hey, I got a great deal on meat, and mentioned a specific store. The staffer said, I would never eat meat from there because they put chemicals on that meat to make it red. Well, not Not quite true. We do some atmospheric packaging. There's oxygen that keeps that red, just like if you look in your arm, you know, blood going away from the heart's one color, blood coming back. Didn't believe me. So I do what I often do. I phoned a fact. Picked my phone up, called Dr. MeeCee, College of Agricultural Sciences, Penn State University, faculty, Animal Science Department, teaches a meat class. Dr. MeeCee, put him on speaker. I have a question for you. What makes meat red in the packaging? That's about 80% oxygen, about 20% carbon dioxide, atmospheric packaging. Not everybody could hear me. Can you send that in a text? Sent it in a text. Held the text out. Now, the staffer said, that's fine. I'm still not going to buy my meat there. But you know, the staffer probably will not be repeating the fact that chemicals are added to meat to keep them red. The conversation was moving. That was one. Jim's son Andy came this Saturday night. We went out to dinner. Andy's very lovely girlfriend is transitioning a little bit from a vegetarian diet to including more protein. And so we mentioned, of course, you look outside, we have beef cattle. And Andy said, well, we're going to start eating more beef, but we have to make sure it's grass-fed. Now, I said, I'm going to play devil's advocate. Let's have a little fun. Why? Because the cattle that eat grain are sicker, right? I don't know. Why is that? Let's look it up. So after a while, he came back to me sort of grinning and said, well, I did find a study out of Australia with 18 head of cattle, and that was great. But it was another time to just keep that conversation moving along. Why? Every single day we have to advocate, because if we don't, the conversation is going to get away from us. So every day I want you to be an advocate for agriculture. Now, I scanned a few other things. Here's my paper, the Harrisburg Patriot News, the living section, because on Sunday when the paper comes out, I don't want to read the hard stuff. I want something light and fluffy. This was pretty light and fluffy. Where are the 10 mid-state reality stars now? Well, where do I go to? Because, you know, that I'm not quite as trim as I used to be. I want to see what happened to this Biggest Loser. Did she keep that weight off, and why? Flip the page. I'm excited. I look. Did you learn any lessons from being on the show? She did learn some lessons. Before the show, she wasn't educated. She didn't know about GMOs. With the reference to that is why she was able to keep at least part of her weight off. So I thought, I'm going to try to get a hold of this person because I need to take my own advice. Every day I need to advocate for agriculture. So I started calling. I started Googling. I never was able to locate this individual because I'd like to have that conversation. A few years ago, Success Magazine, which I really like to read, had a little column Dr. Oz writes every month. Here's one. Know the potential effects of genetically modified and hormone-enhanced food. So I had to try to get a hold of Success Magazine or Dr. Oz. Now, there was some inferences in here that those poor old chickens were getting loaded up with hormones again. So I called, couldn't get through. So then I started calling the Egg Board, the Pork Council, anybody else that had a little more SWAT than me. It's interesting because I do believe the online version of this article was a little different than the one that was in print a few years ago. So sometimes that advocacy can make a change. And remember, when we're doing it, we need to meet people where they are. We can't bring the dissertation, we need Cliff Notes. So assignment number 1 is to advocate for agriculture and biotechnology every single day, but just do it with honey and not vinegar. Number 2, your second assignment, is to educate someone deliberately one time every week. Put it in your calendar. I put it in my BlackBerry. You know, we do get stuck in our ivory towers. I get stuck sometime in that gilded hallway of the Capitol and maybe that sort of self-contained environment in the lab. But there are many things that we can do to make a difference. We had a couple of your speakers including Val here in front of me, that came to Pennsylvania to testify at a hearing, again, about our favorite subject, it seems, of the week, but GMO labeling. After that hearing was over, my staff and I walked the halls to 253 offices in a means to play prevent defense, because our session's over, Now, there's no doubt there will be additional bills introduced, but we wanted to provide information before those bills were introduced next time. Now, when the bills were introduced this section, I was shocked at some of the co-sponsors, and I was really having a difficult time keeping up. And what I found out is, the ask was pretty simple. Oh, gee, we know that this is fat-free, you can see gluten-free. Why not label, whether something contains GMOs or not? Pretty simple ask, why not? Sign on as co-sponsors. We were able to have several people step off as co-sponsor that bill, but I didn't want to have to go through that exercise again. And as I was deliberately running along with my staff to 253 offices, we made sure the staff had the information, the members had the information, and I used 3 pieces just to illustrate what was helpful. I used the AMA policy, because as I go in the door, I do represent everybody from Big Ag down to the Grange. All have the same opinion on this issue, but you might think that perhaps I could be a little bit biased. So, AMA, who can be against the American Medical Association? Very small, Cliff Notes, very easy. Scientific American editorial, that was always helpful. And I like to include Mark Linus's recant from the Oxford Farming Conference and highlight a few pieces. Just 3, leave our cards, and then say, if we can help in any way at BIA's resources, please let us know. That was really very helpful. And since that time, several of the staffers have called and say, can you provide some additional information? Last week, in my education of the week, this young man in Pennsylvania is helping with the federal food labeling bill, 4462, and he is charged with getting farmers and others in specific congressional districts to send letters to the congressmen asking them to support the bill. So I called him up and said, can I help you? Because I sort of quarterbacked the effort there in Pennsylvania. We had a great educational session. He really didn't understand Roundup Ready beans, what that means. He didn't understand no-till farming, how, if you're no-tilling, you're not going over that field time and time again, you save a lot of fuel. It's better for the environment. He just didn't understand the 101 of the agriculture behind the biotechnology. It was a great experience, and as he went on to do his work, he had a much better understanding. Now, I teased him about this old teacher making him come to class, but it was a good class. The next week, picked up the phone, called me a couple times again. It's a deliberate education. We are here to help. And again, we can't assume that everybody knows the difference between correlation and cause and effect. We do, because we live it every single day. It's part of our language. But at that GMO labeling hearing, the first person out of the box was Dr. Troy Ott, who teaches reproductive physiology at Penn State. He did a magnificent job and ended up, and he met everybody where they were with a great slide that said how to spot bad science. And he talked about linkages, correlations, rather cause and effect. And you've all heard this one, the consumption of organic food has increased and the consumption of diagnosed cases of autism increased. But we would never in a million years put those 2 things together in a cause and effect. People don't think the difference between correlation. You pick up the paper. I like coffee. Coffee has been linked to cancer. Coffee has been linked to increased health. Coffee's linked to a lot of things. But it's the correlation, cause, and effect. Make sure that we're meeting people where they're at. So assignment number 2, every single week, we are going to educate somebody about agriculture or biotechnology. Now, we have our daily activity, our weekly activity. Now you have your monthly activity. Senator, I'm so glad you're at my table. I want you to cultivate relationships with elected or officials every single month. So when you go back, starting at the local level, moving on up to your congressional delegation, schedule an appointment in the office. Call up, ask for an appointment, and then I want you to do 3 things when you get the appointment. I want you to say thank you for the service, because we heard a lot of negative things about our elected officials, but I'm here to tell you they work very hard, day in, day out, long hours, on millions of issues. It's hard to keep up the speed. So first of all, thank you for your service. Say thank you first thing in the door. And remember, these meetings need to be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, not hours. So we're not bringing our research necessarily, we're bringing Cliff Notes. Second of all, offer yourself as a resource and make sure that you're seeing the person who you are a constituent of. You don't want to go in somebody else's district. So for me, it's Adam Harris is my representative. For me, Senator Corman is my senator. Then we go on up to Congressman Schuster. You know, Senator Casey, of course, they cover the whole state. Get that appointment. Get in, offer yourself as a resource, and then follow up with a handwritten thank you note. And if everybody in this room did that, we could really start affecting positive change. People are desperate for good information, and you are the keys that can provide that information that can really change this debate. This week, because of these types of relationships, I've got called in some pretty funny things. Can you help us market Concord grapes? We've lost some of our market share. How do you remove a dead arborvitae tree? I got a call about a beetle that's being quarantined in Berks County. I do not represent any interest of any of those, but yet people just know that I'm the person that talks about agriculture. Let's give them a call and see if we can't get some help. Your assignments. Again, cultivate relationships. Every single month, get an appointment. Now here's extra credit. 3 assignments and 1 extra credit. It doesn't hurt to go to that elected official's fundraiser now and again. And you know, back in the district office, back in those districts, there are pancake breakfasts that aren't hundreds of dollars. And I even know a young woman in Pennsylvania who's a chemist that just started a PAC to support scientists running for office. And Shaughnessy has chatted with me, and I'm sure I'll be writing a check. So a little extra credit now and again doesn't hurt either. And let's not all line up whether we're on the left or the right. I like to say, at Versant Strategies, we're all ag all day. It doesn't matter whether we're Democrats, Republicans, or independents. We're here to further the cause of agriculture and biotechnology because we have a hungry world to feed. Again, we're going to go back to those assignments because my ag education taught me that you have to hear something 7 times before you remember it. Number 1, we want you to advocate every single day and do that using that SQR3 technique. When you're scanning the news, you hear something, question, phone a fact, research it, then respond with rhetoric or in writing. Educate deliberately. Share your science once a week. Pass something along. I thought I'd share this with you. Put it on your Outlook calendar and make sure you do it. Just make sure you're doing it at the level that person can understand. Think Cliff Notes. My former partner at Versant was our approach chair in the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania, and he always told me, don't ever take anything in longer than 1 page as a leave behind. 1 page is all I want to see. And it took me a few years to get in the 1-page mind frame, but I did. Educating once a week and cultivating that relationship once a month. Join me in throwing these stones in the old farm pond. Just continually advocate, educate, and cultivate those good relationships. You know, we need to do that because, as Paul Harvey very eloquently said, because God made a farmer. And now it's up to all of us here in this hall today to tell the rest of that story. Thank you.